If someone asked you to name the first 3 US national parks, you might respond with something like Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Sequoia parks. But you'd be wrong. America's second ever national park is no longer a national park, but actually one of its first ever state parks. And this park, along with 3 other sites with wildly different fates, comprise the interesting stories of the places that were touched with the honor of being a national park, and then fate had different plans. Formed in 1875, America's second national park was in a place you might not expect it to be. It wasn't in the vast, untamed wilderness of the West, but rather on an island in the Great Lakes. Mackinac Island, home to Fort Mackinac, was mostly owned by the United States government, and caught the eye of Senator Thomas Ferry, who thought the island's natural features and history made it national park worthy. Mackinac was also closer to civilization, as compared to the desolate Yellowstone, secluded in the Rocky Mountains. So after 2 years of the senator pushing for the creation of a park on the island, his work paid off, and on March 3, 1875, 3 years and 2 days after Yellowstone was created, Mackinac National Park became the United States' second national park. At first, the park was a success. National park status intrigued visitors across the country, and the park saw a rise in visitation, which prompted the men at the park to look into preserving some of the historic structures on the island, including parts of the aforementioned fort that were no longer in use, but served as a relic of an earlier time. But as can often be the case with large-scale aspirations, money was a problem. Congress refused to supply the fledgling park with the funds needed to make the repairs, and in addition to that, like at Yellowstone, very few people were there to patrol the park's boundaries, leading to rules violations on the island. A lease program was started to promote living on the island, and several cottages were built on the premises by wealthy visitors. But in the end, the Army decided to close the fort in the 1890s, and by 1895, the abandoned fort and the national park were transferred over to the state, becoming Michigan's first state park, which remains to this day. Heading west to North Dakota, a national game preserve lies within the Devil's Lake complex of wildlife refuges, White Horse Hill National Game Preserve, formerly known as Sully's Hill National Park. The story of how the hill and the park got its name traces back to the wars between the United States and the American Indians in the years following the Civil War. A cavalry division was encamped on the highest hill in the Devil's Lake area, awaiting the arrival of Colonel Sully. But when he did not show up, the group decided to at least name the hill in his honor. Sully's Hill got national recognition in 1904 when Theodore Roosevelt, a man who had spent quite a bit of time in the North Dakotan foothills, and would later get a park named after him further west in the state, would make Sully's Hill the nation's 8th national park, including Mackinac, which had already been decommissioned at this point after the creation of Wind Cave the previous year. Sully's Hill enjoyed a mild amount of visitors, and about a decade after its creation, buffalo and elk were reintroduced to the area, after being nearly on the verge of extinction. But the fact that the roads in the park were, well, non-existent, detracted quite a bit from the park's potential. By 1931, with the Great Depression in full swing and the Park Service out of resources to spend on Sully's Hill, the property was handed over to the Fish and Wildlife Service, becoming a national game preserve. In 2019, it was decided to change the name of the hill, and the preserve, to White Horse Hill, the traditional Native American name for the landmark, due to the bad reputation Sully had gained as the cause for the massacre of a significant number of Native Americans during the Indian Wars. And thus White Horse Hill continues to be a prosperous reserve to this day, providing support for various flora and fauna alike. The next park on the list was for a time even more popular than Yellowstone itself. Established in 1902, Platt National Park was the longest lived out of the former parks we're talking about today, lasting over 60 years before it got decommissioned. The park was created in Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma, and came about as an agreement between the American Indian nations living there and the US government. The land was important for protection because of its unique freshwater and mineral springs located along the creeks in the area, and Platt became one of the most heavily populated sites by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression, with major improvements made to the park between 1933 and 1940. In its early years, Platt attracted quite a few visitors due to its accessible location. But as the years went on, the annual visitation rates did not see drastic increases. So by the time America's bicentennial celebration was approaching in 1976, Congress was forced to make a choice between giving funds to Platt or Yellowstone National Park. Seeing as Yellowstone is still a national park today, you can probably guess which one they chose. Platt's story doesn't end in tragedy, though. After getting redesignated to a national recreation area, which is still a part of the National Park Service, something the above 2 parks can't boast, it merged with the nearby recreation unit to become Chickasaw National Recreation Area, paying tribute to the Native Americans forcibly relocated to the area around a century and a half earlier. Today, Chickasaw still sees over 1 million visitors annually, and remains a popular place for Midwesterners to seek out and experience the beauty of this former national park for themselves. Our final park being discussed today is in a bit of an abstract location. Fort McHenry National Park was located in the middle of Baltimore Harbor. Designated a national park in 1925, Fort McHenry was the site which inspired Francis Scott Key to write the poem The Star-Spangled Banner, which eventually became the national anthem of the United States over a century later. Unfortunately for the national park, it only lasted 14 years before being redesignated as a national monument, which it still is today. So there you have it. 4 areas, Mackinac, Sully's Hill, Platt, and Fort McHenry, were all graced with the honor of being a part of America's best idea, until the country found other uses for these parks. And while these areas no longer retain their high title, let us do well not to forget the still ongoing glory within the places known as America's former national parks. If you liked what you heard, consider subscribing to RAC Adventures for more info about national parks and so much more. Until next time, this is RAC Adventures signing out. Goodbye!